Hey, what's up? It's Dan Perry, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to build a wood fence gate the right way so it's easy to build, it looks great, and most importantly, so it doesn't sag. Now, this project will cost about $140 and should take anywhere between 4 to 8 hours to complete, depending on how fast you work. So let's jump right in.
The first step is to take 3 measurements. The first measurement is the distance between the posts at the narrowest point. So to find that, measure at the top, the bottom, and the middle, then take the smallest measurement of the 3. The next measurement is from the top of the fence to the center of the bottom rail on the fence. The third measurement is the distance between the fence rails. Next, you're going to want to buy some materials. You're going to need a couple of 2x4s, preferably made from the same wood as your fence, which in this case is redwood, but you can use any 2x4, it really doesn't matter. You'll need 7 to 10 fence pickets, depending on how wide the fence is and how wide your fence pickets are, of course. These are 6-inch wide fence pickets. You'll need some screws. So I recommend star drive coated screws, both 1 5/8 inches and 4 inches. You'll need some gate hinges. Now these hinges are the ones I recommend, but you can also use these hinges. You'll need a gate latch and a handle, which is optional, but it makes it easier to open the gate. You can find a complete list of tools and materials, including the exact screws I recommend, at handymanstartup.com/gate. Now let's get on to the build. So we're gonna build the gate either on the ground or on a workbench, and then hang it on the fence post after it's built. So first, start by cutting the top and bottom rails for the gate. So these need to be 1 inch shorter than the smallest distance between the posts. So that first measurement you took earlier, you want to make the rails 1 inch shorter than that. So you can use a miter saw or a chop saw, whatever you want to call it. But a handsaw or a circular saw will also work just fine. This doesn't need to be a pretty cut. Once you have the fence rails cut, lay them on a flat surface. The ground will work just fine if you don't have a workbench nearby. Then you want to position them the appropriate distance apart. So if you're using this type of hinge, you'll place them the same exact distance from each other as the fence rails on the fence. That way the lag screws will be able to mount directly to the post and the rails. Now if you're using this type of hinge, which I recommend because it's easier, then you'll take the distance between the rails and then subtract 3 inches. That way the top lag screw on the hinge has some post to screw into. You want to make sure the rails are squared up as well. Okay, the easiest way to do this is to measure the diagonals and make sure that they're exactly the same. Now, if you have an edge or line to work off of, it certainly helps here. So I'm using the line on this driveway and a square to help position the rails so that they're square. Now, this doesn't need to be perfect, but you do want to get it as close as you can. Be sure to mark the locations of the rails on the ground in case you accidentally bump them or move them. You don't want to constantly have to reposition them. Or, even better, if you're working on a workbench, you can temporarily screw them to the bench to hold them in place, and then you'll remove the screws later when you're ready to install the gate. So next, we'll cut a 2x4 to be used as a diagonal brace.
Now, the key to keeping your gate from sagging over time is to install this diagonal brace here, because that's going to give it the rigidity it needs to not just sag immediately. And it's also important to mention the direction of the brace. Now, as you see in the video, I'm actually building it backwards, and I'd recommend it doing the opposite. So what you want is the beginning of the diagonal brace to start on the bottom side of the diagonal brace to start on the hinge side. So it goes from the bottom hinge up to the top of the gate on the latch side over here. And the reason for that is that if you do it the other way, and let's say you build your gate like this, where these are your hinges over here, what happens is the gravitational force, okay? Let's say the gravity on the gate will just represent with these arrows. When you do it this way, That gravitational force is going to put this board in compression. So that force is going to be driven down. It's going to be pushing down onto this hinge, okay? But if you do it this way, that same force that's out here on the end is going to translate through the fence boards. Then it's going to actually put this board, the diagonal brace, is then going to be in tension, which means it's being pulled instead of compressed or pushed. So it's being pulled, and this joint right here and this joint right here, that's going to slowly separate over time, and your gate is just going to sag just a little bit, but just enough where you're going to have to adjust your latch. So it's better to start the bottom of your diagonal brace by the bottom hinge and go up and out like this, and it's going to be just a little bit more rigid.
So to get it right the first time, lay it on top of the rails and mark where to cut it. Then cut it using whatever saw you have available, ideally a chop saw or a miter saw. Next, using 4-inch exterior coated screws, attach the rails to that diagonal brace to form a Z shape. You'll want to pre-drill the holes for the screws here so you don't split the diagonal brace. Make sure the rails stay in position during this step. Again, screwing them to a workbench makes this a bit easier. Next, using 1 5/8 inch long exterior coated wood screws, attach 2 fence pickets to the rails on the hinge side. So use the measurement you took earlier that was from the top of the fence to the center of the bottom rail and mark that distance on the fence pickets. Then center that mark on the bottom rail of the gate and attach the 2 pickets with the screws to the top and the bottom rails and to the diagonal brace. Make sure the end fence picket is lined up with the rails. Now it's time to attach the hinges to the gate. Use a speed square and a pencil to mark a line at the center of both the top and bottom rails of the gate. Position the hinge so the center of the pivot point is just hanging off the edge, and mark the screw holes with a pencil on the line that you just marked with the square. Next, pre-drill with a 3/16 inch drill bit at the marked locations. Use an impact driver with a socket wrench attachment to screw in the lag bolts. You can also use a regular drill or a socket wrench if you don't have an impact driver. It's just going to take a couple extra minutes to do. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up so you can find this video later when you need it. The gate is almost ready to be hung, but we need to install one more 2x4, which will act as a support for the gate latch. Position this board about 1 inch in from the end of the rails, and you'll attach it with 4-inch screws. Of course, make sure to pre-drill so you don't split the board. At this point, the gate is ready to be hung on the post. So pick up the gate and position it by the post you will be mounting it to. If you've attached it to the workbench, now is the time to detach it. You may have to sit the gate on top of shims to make it easier to mount and position it in place. And if the gate is too tall, then you might have to dig a small trench underneath the gate so the top of the gate pickets line up with the fence pickets. So with the gate in the closed position, butt the hinge side right up to the post. A small gap is fine, but there's no need to leave a gap intentionally. Attach the hinges with the center bolt only to hold it temporarily to the post. So you'll pre-drill with 3/16 inch drill bit, then use the same tool you use to attach the hinges to the gate. Once you've done this, you can check the fit. So make sure the gate doesn't rub on the post on the other side. You want to have a solid gap of about 1 inch between the rails of the gate and the other fence post. So if everything is good, attach the rest of the pickets to the gate. You'll probably have to cut a fence picket long ways at the end to fill in the final gap. And to do this, just use a circular saw, set it up on a bench, mark your line, and carefully make your cut. Eye protection is essential here. I also like to wear a respirator and earplugs usually. So test the gate to see if you can open it. If the gate rubs on the ground, and it often does, you'll need to cut some of the bottom of the gate off. To do that, mark a line across the bottom gate pickets about 1 inch above the ground while the gate is hanging on the fence. Then remove the gate and use a circular saw to cut along that line. Once the gate can be opened and closed easily, attach the rest of the lag screws to secure the hinges. So I usually prop up the opposite side of the gate with some shims or something for this step to eliminate any sagging that may have occurred while adding more fence pickets. That way, when I attach these other lag screws, it really secures the gate in the position that I want it to be. Okay, so let's move on to mounting the latch. So grab the latch, this is the one I like to use. Place the mechanism where you want it to be, mark the mounting holes with a pencil, pre-drill with a 3/16 inch drill bit, and attach with the provided lag screws. The height of the latching mechanism doesn't really matter. I usually just eyeball it and put it somewhere between halfway and 2/3 of the way up the gate. Most of the time, you'll need to create a small relief cut to make room for the mechanism. I'm using my circular saw to do this, but be very careful when using a circular saw like this. It's definitely safer to remove the gate and make this cut on a bench, or to grab a reciprocating saw and use that instead. Now, close the gate and position the strike inside the mechanism. Mark the screw holes, then attach using the supplied lag bolts. Make sure that the lag bolt is going into the 2x4 support behind the fence picket, because the fence picket by itself is not strong enough to hold the gate closed. Test the gate to make sure it's working properly. And this is not required, but mounting a handle on either side of the gate will make it much easier to operate. If everything is working, and if you haven't already done so, go back and add the rest of the screws to attach the fence pickets to the rails and the diagonal brace. And by the way, did you know that you can make $100 per hour or more doing simple projects like building gates, or even just doing things like hanging shelves for homeowners? Now, if you like working with your hands and you want to escape the drudgery of a desk job, then consider starting a handyman or other home service business. It's surprisingly easy to do, it's surprisingly profitable, and you can learn exactly how to start a profitable handyman business from scratch at handymanstartup.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan Perry, and I'll see you in the next video.